Lagavulin 16 year. It's an old favorite, right? And it's the epitome of that big, smoky, peaty, Islay Scotch whiskey character and experience. But if you haven't noticed, it's gotten quite expensive lately, and that's especially so when we look under the hood and we find out the specs on this whiskey aren't quite what we might hope that they would be. So, I prepared my list of my top 5 choices for alternative peated Scotch whiskeys that you can buy for less than a bottle of Lagavulin 16 year, and that list starts right now. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. So let's talk about the whiskey. As much as we've all enjoyed it, it is not presented as well as we would hope. It's a 43% ABV whiskey. It is chill filtered. It has color added. This is a whiskey with a big market presence put out there by Diageo. It's a 35 ppm whiskey for what that is worth. If you are not familiar, it's supposed to give us an understanding of the peat content of the whiskey, but it is a pretty unreliable indicator of what the peat character, quality, or the peat experience you're going to have with a specific whiskey. I include this and point it out just so that we can compare to some of the other whiskeys down the list. This is a bourbon and sherry matured whiskey, which is important when we're comparing bottles because it does have that sherry influence. But the problem is this bottle just can't be bought for less than $100 anymore. I see it $102, $105 for a decent value. I've seen it as much as $120 plus. So I have prepared a list, and it's a list of peated whiskeys. We're going to start with a couple of honorable mentions. These are whiskeys that didn't quite make my list of recommendations, but they are such obvious alternatives to Lagavulin 16 year that I'm going to touch upon them here. The first of these is a whiskey with a tremendous amount of overlap with the Lagavulin 16 year, and it's Caol Ila 12 year. It is another whiskey that I think of as really emblematic of that sort of smoky, ashy, peaty sort of experience, and it is another Diageo whiskey from Lagavulin's sister distillery, and it's sort of a sister whiskey. They have a lot in common. It is a 43% whiskey, chill filtered, with color added. We wish that we would have a better presentation to do justice to the Caol Ila, but it's like Lagavulin 16, it's still a good whiskey as bottled. It's a 35 ppm for what that's worth, and I believe that it's a bourbon matured whiskey. You don't have to imagine how good it could be if it had a better presentation, because they make a lot of Caol Ila, and there's a lot of it on the independent bottled market. There's single cask Caol Ilas, there's independent bottled Caol Ilas, and they are pretty reliable. There's no guarantees when you're in these independent bottlings. No guarantees, certainly with single cask bottlings. Even with all those problems, it's still about a $90 whiskey, which is a little much given the problem with the specs, but it's still coming in cheaper, again, 4 years younger than the Lagavulin, so I include it. My next honorable mention comes from a close neighbor of Lagavulin's, barely a mile away, down a stretch of paved walkway on the southeastern end of Islay at Laphroaig. Laphroaig 10-year cask strength. Now this is a 57.9% ABV, non-chill filtered. Unfortunately, I believe there's color added to these Laphroaigs, including this one. Bourbon matured. This is a whiskey that should be able to be bought for about $92, maybe $95 cheaper than the 43% Lagavulin 16 year, and that's a lot of specs and a lot more whiskey for less money. The only problem is, for me anyway, just me maybe, Laphroaig needs more time in the warehouse, to me, than 10 years to shave off the sort of sharper, sort of unbalanced medicinal notes in the spirit. So that's why I have this as an honorable mention, even though it is a significant alternative to the Lagavulin 16 year. If you like Laphroaig, this is a great alternative. For me, I prefer the quarter cask. It's only a 48% whiskey. We know it was in the warehouse for fewer than the 10 years, but because they used much smaller quarter-sized casks, the maturation process is accelerated. This whiskey should be bought for about 70, 72, somewhere around their bottles. Those are my honorable mentions. So, moving in to the list proper, we're going to start at number 5, and we are not going to start on Islay. This is where we're going to put the long row. It's a non-age statement, heavily peated, 50 to 55 ppm for what that is worth, whiskey from the Springbank Distillery. And because of Springbank mania, this is a difficult whiskey to find. If you can find it though, you should be paying less than the $100 that you pay for Lagavulin 16 year. Now, you're getting a non-age statement whiskey, but what you're getting is non-chill filtered, natural colored whiskey. It's bourbon matured, so it's not going to have that sherry influence that the Lagavulin has, but I kind of put it on here as both an alternative to the sort of usual suspects of the Islay peated whiskeys, but also because this is a pretty sought after bottle, hard to find, commands a pretty decent price, and it can still be bought for almost $10 less than the Lagavulin 16 year. Moving on, number 4, and we still are not on Islay. We're on a different island. It's called the Isle of Mull, and that means we're over at Tobermory for the Lechake 10 year. And this is a 46.3% ABV whiskey, non-chill filtered, no color added. It's a bourbon matured, peated whiskey, 37 ppm on the specs for what that's worth. Again, I find this whiskey has a very similar campfire-y, smoky sort of experience, and this is a bargain compared to the Lagavulin 16 year. It's a 6-year younger whiskey, obviously, but it should be bought for $72, maybe $75. Honestly, a tremendous 10-year whiskey. Moving on to number 3, we are indeed returning to Islay, and we are going to check in with the Kilchoman Distillery. Kilchoman Mocker Bay, ... Cask strength. It's a 58.6% cask strength whiskey, non-chill filtered, no color added, bourbon matured and sherry matured. It claims a 50 ppm, but what you're not getting is an age statement. It's Kilchoman, it's not an age statement whiskey, and it's going to take pretty much the full $100, but you're getting a cask strength whiskey for that has outstanding specs across the board. Kilchoman does non-age statement whiskeys very, very well, consistently well throughout their core range, so it's a pretty solid alternative for the same price. 58.6% cask strength whiskey. So we get to number 2. This is where I'm going to place the Port Charlotte. It's obviously going to be on the list. The Port Charlotte Islay Barley, the 2012, can be bought for about $85. And for that, you're getting a 50% ABV whiskey. You're getting bourbon and wine casks, not sherry casks. You're getting second fill wine casks on the 2012, I believe. It's no color added. I think there's some overlap here in the profile, more so than even the 10 year with this whiskey. This is a favorite on the channel, and it is a pretty tremendous whiskey when it can be bought for less than the Lagavulin, despite the fact that it is significantly younger whiskey. So if that's number 2, where does that leave us for number 1? It leaves us about a mile or so farther down that paved pathway past Lagavulin, another mile. We'll find the Ardbeg Distillery. Lagavulin's very, very close neighbors at Ardbeg make a whiskey called the Ugadal, and it is a cask strength non-age statement whiskey. It's about 54.2%, non-chill filtered, no color added. It's bourbon and the sherry matured. I think of this whiskey as a real sort of flagship peated Islay sort of exemplary whiskey, the way we think of the Lagavulin 16 year. And yes, we don't get that big healthy age statement, but we're getting a cask strength presentation with all the other specs, and honestly, a much more robust, a much more serious whiskey, 50 ppm for what that's worth, for pretty much the same price, for the difference of a couple dollars. This is a whiskey that should be bought for $99, maybe less. If you're lucky, you're getting a pretty serious peated whiskey for the same price that you're getting a relatively watered down Lagavulin 16 year, as much as we all know it and love it. So that's my list. What's on yours? There are plenty of other high quality peated whiskeys in this price category that I haven't mentioned, some of which are from the same distilleries I've been talking about today. Let us know your choices in the comments. As always, you can follow us for more information on Instagram at WhiskeyAbouts. And if you enjoyed this video, you found it helpful, I'd love it if you subscribe. You can use this button that's going to pop up right over here. We're still working toward our 500 subscriber, but that big video is coming up. You don't want to miss it. I hope to see you there.